You're not welcome at our New Year's party, Dad. I read the text 3 times before it sank in. My own son, uninviting me from celebrating in his $1 million house while his wife's rich family laughed and drank champagne. I'm Jim Sullivan. I'm 65. I've been an electrician my whole life. And 30 minutes after getting that text, I made one phone call that would destroy everything my son thought he'd built. See, Ryan believed he was self-made. Successful investment banker, beautiful house, perfect wife from old money. He'd worked so hard to climb above his blue-collar father that he forgot something important. He forgot to check who actually owned the ground he was standing on. That New Year's Eve, while I sat in my pickup truck watching strangers celebrate in my property, I realized my son needed to learn the difference between earning something and being given it. The lesson was going to cost him everything, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a working man's quiet revenge became the most expensive education in respect my son ever received. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever been excluded by someone you sacrificed everything for? And hit that subscribe button because stories like this one don't tell themselves. I wasn't always the embarrassment Ryan made me out to be. 43 years ago, I started Sullivan Electrical with nothing but a toolbox and a beat-up van that barely made it up hills. Back then, Ryan's mother, Linda, was still alive, still believing in me when nobody else would. She'd pack my lunch every morning in a brown paper bag, kiss me goodbye at the door, tell me we were building something important for our family's future. Those were good years. Hard years, but good ones. I'd come home covered in sawdust and wire shavings, my hands black with honest dirt, and Linda would have dinner waiting on our second-hand table. Ryan would run to the door when he heard my truck rumbling up our apartment building's driveway, wanting to see what tools I'd brought home, what stories I had from the job sites. "Daddy, did you fix the lights today?" he'd ask, eyes wide with the kind of pure admiration that only a 5-year-old can muster for his father. "Fix more than lights, buddy," I'd tell him, lifting him up so he could feel important. Fix people's problems, made their homes safe and warm. Linda would smile from the kitchen, proud of the life we were building one paycheck at a time. She never complained about the modest apartment, the second-hand furniture that didn't match, the way I had to stretch every dollar until it screamed. She believed in the future I was working toward with my bare hands. "Take care of our boy, Jim," she whispered on her deathbed 5 years ago. Cancer had stolen most of her voice by then, but not her love. I promised her I would. I promised I'd give Ryan everything I never had, growing up poor. After the funeral, I threw myself into work like a man possessed. Double shifts, weekend calls, holiday emergencies when families needed power restored. The insurance money from Linda's policy was substantial, $2 million. But I didn't touch a penny for personal use. Instead, I invested it, quietly, carefully. While Ryan finished his MBA and started his banking career, I was buying properties across the city. But what I built in silence would shock even Wall Street. Most people see an old electrician in work clothes driving a rusty pickup truck with tools rattling in the back. They see calloused hands, faded jeans, and work boots that have seen better decades. They don't see Sullivan Holdings, LLC. They don't see the 15 rental properties generating $28,000 a month in passive income. They don't see the $18 million real estate portfolio I've built one wire, one outlet, one honest day's work at a time. I lived small so Ryan could dream big. I kept driving the same truck, kept wearing the same clothes, kept living in the same modest trailer while my bank account grew and my property empire expanded. Every month, I'd take the rental income and buy another piece of real estate. Duplexes, small apartment buildings, commercial properties, anything that would generate steady cash flow and appreciate over time. 4 years ago, Ryan called me with panic in his voice. He'd just made senior vice president at Blackstone Financial, and he needed a house that matched his new status. The problem was simple. His salary was impressive on paper, but his savings account wasn't. "Dad, I found the perfect place," he said, excitement and desperation fighting in his voice. "But I need to move fast. These houses don't stay on the market long in this neighborhood. Everyone wants to live here." I drove over to see it that evening after finishing a commercial rewiring job. The house was beautiful, no question about it. A colonial-style mansion with 4 bedrooms, 3-car garage, and a backyard that could host corporate parties. The kind of place that whispered success to everyone who saw it. The price tag was $1.2 million. Ryan had managed to save $50,000 for a down payment and had dreams bigger than his bank account could support. "I can make the monthly payments, Dad," he said, walking me through the empty rooms like he was already the owner. "But I need someone to co-sign, help with the down payment structure, just until I build more equity and establish a track record with this income level." Ryan had no idea he was living in Daddy's house. I looked at my son that night, ambitious, hardworking, desperate to prove himself in a world that judged success by your address and the car in your driveway. I remembered being his age, wanting so badly to provide for Linda, to show the world I was more than just another guy with calloused hands and dirt under his fingernails. That's when I made a decision that seemed loving at the time, but would teach us both lessons about pride, respect, and family. Through my shell company, Meridian Property Group, LLC, I structured what appeared to be a lease-to-own arrangement with favorable terms. Ryan thought he was getting a sweetheart mortgage deal from a private lender who believed in young professionals. The paperwork was complex, professional, completely legal, and completely misunderstood. Every month, Ryan sent $4,200 to Meridian Property Group, thinking he was paying down a mortgage principal and building equity in his dream home. In reality, he was paying rent to his old man. I covered the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the maintenance costs, the emergency repairs, all through the company structure. Ryan never knew his father was handling every problem behind the scenes. The 30-day termination clause was buried in Section 12 of the lease agreement. Standard language, really. The kind of legal boilerplate that most people skip over because they trust the person offering them a good deal. If the tenant violated terms, or if the landlord needed to reclaim the property for personal use, either party could terminate with 30 days written notice. Ryan signed it without question. He trusted Meridian Property Group, never thinking to investigate who owned the company or what their business model was. Why would he? The deal was too good, the terms too favorable. Sometimes people don't ask questions when they're getting exactly what they want. For 4 years, it worked perfectly. Ryan made his payments religiously, never missing a due date. That clause would change everything. Ryan threw dinner parties for his colleagues in my dining room, hosted barbecues for Ashley's family in my backyard, showed off his smart investment to anyone who'd listen. He was genuinely proud of what he believed he'd accomplished, proud of his independence, proud of being what he called a self-made success story. I was proud too, but in a different way. Proud of the invisible safety net I'd created without his knowledge. Proud of the quiet protection I could provide without diminishing his sense of achievement. When the central air conditioning died that first brutal summer, Meridian Property Group had a new unit installed within 6 hours. When the roof needed emergency repairs after a storm damaged half the neighborhood, the company took care of it overnight while Ryan was traveling for business. When the water heater failed on Christmas morning while Ashley's parents were visiting, I had a new one installed before Ryan even knew there was a problem. Ryan thought he had excellent property management and unusually responsive service. He bragged to his neighbors about how efficiently his mortgage company handled maintenance issues. He had no idea he had a father who loved him enough to handle every crisis behind the scenes, to ensure his success never wavered, to protect his reputation, even when it meant sacrificing recognition for my own generosity. But love without respect is just enabling, and enabling without boundaries is just weakness disguised as kindness. Ryan's promotion to senior vice president changed everything between us. Suddenly, he was making $350,000 a year and running with a crowd that measured human worth by zip codes, car brands, and social connections. The invitations to family dinners started coming less frequently, always with conditions attached. The phone calls got shorter and more formal. The visits became obligations he fulfilled rather than pleasures he enjoyed. At first, I told myself it was natural progression. Successful people get busy with important responsibilities. They have different pressures, different expectations, different social circles. But then I met Ashley Whitmore at their engagement party, and I understood what was really happening to my relationship with my son. Then he met Ashley, and everything got worse. Ashley came from what people politely call old money, the kind of wealth that's been in families for so many generations that spending it feels like a birthright rather than a privilege. Her father, Harrison Whitmore III, owned 3 country clubs and a sailing yacht named Privilege that was worth more than most people's houses. Her mother, Victoria, spoke with the kind of carefully modulated accent that comes from generations of private schools, European boarding schools, and finishing programs designed to teach young women how to look down on others with perfect politeness. When Ryan introduced me at their engagement party as my father Jim, Ashley's smile tightened just enough to let me know I didn't meet her family's standards for acceptable relatives. "Oh, you're in construction?" she asked, her eyes taking inventory of my clean but obviously off the rack clothes, my work hardened hands, my lack of jewelry or obvious wealth signals. "Electrical work," I said, trying to match her polite tone. "Been doing it for over 40 years. Started my own company, built it from nothing." "How authentic," she said, the word dripping with the kind of condescension that wealthy people think sounds like a compliment. "It must be so satisfying to work with your hands." I watched Ryan's cheeks flush with something that looked uncomfortably like embarrassment, and that's when I knew I was losing my son to people who would never understand the value of honest work. That conversation was the beginning of the end of our close relationship. Over the following months, Ashley whispered in Ryan's ear about networking opportunities and social positioning. She talked about how important it was to surround yourself with the right kind of people, how success in business meant more than just professional competence. It meant class, breeding, the right social connections that could open doors. She never directly said I was the wrong kind of person for her husband to associate with publicly. She didn't have to. Her meaning was crystal clear in every polite smile, every subtle suggestion that Ryan might want to upgrade his social circle for his career's advancement. The Sunday dinners stopped first. The wedding invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock, so thick you could use it as armor, with gold embossing that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. It was beautiful, expensive, and deliberately exclusive, the kind of invitation that made a statement about the kind of people who mattered in Ashley's world. At the bottom, in elegant calligraphy that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who couldn't afford their own calligrapher, it read, "Ceremony and reception limited to immediate family only. Black tie required. No exceptions." I stared at those words for a long time, sitting at my small kitchen table with Linda's photo, looking down at me from the wall. Immediate family only. I'd raised Ryan alone for the last 5 years of his life after Linda died. I'd been both mother and father, breadwinner and homework helper, coach and cheerleader, the person who taught him to tie his shoes and balance a checkbook. But somehow, in Ashley's carefully orchestrated vision of their perfect wedding day, I wasn't immediate enough. When I called Ryan to ask about the dress code, I didn't own a tuxedo and wasn't sure where to rent one. His voice carried that familiar tension I'd learned to recognize and dread. "Actually, Dad, about that," he said, and I could hear Ashley's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Ashley and I talked, and we decided to keep the ceremony really small. Just parents and siblings, really intimate." "I'm your parent, Ryan. Your only living parent." I know, but Ashley's family has certain expectations about these things. It's going to be very formal, very traditional. The country club has specific requirements, and there's going to be a lot of business networking happening. You'd probably be more comfortable watching from home anyway. We're having the whole thing professionally filmed, so you won't miss anything important. The wedding was held at the Riverside Country Club, the kind of place where membership requires references from 3 existing members and a bank account with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. The wedding invitation said immediate family only. I drove by the country club that morning, telling myself I was just curious about the weather, maybe checking to see if they needed any electrical work done on their facilities. What I really wanted was one glimpse of my son on the most important day of his life, even if I had to watch from a distance, like some kind of uninvited stranger. I parked across the street and watched through my truck's windshield as the wedding party assembled on the marble steps. Ryan looked handsome in his tuxedo, confident and happy as he greeted guests who arrived in cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Ashley was radiant in white silk and pearls, surrounded by bridesmaids who looked like they'd stepped out of a society magazine spread about perfect weddings. The guests arrived in Mercedes and BMWs and cars I didn't even recognize. Men in expensive suits that fit like they'd been made specifically for their bodies. Women dripping in jewelry that caught the sunlight like captured starfire. They air-kissed and laughed and sipped champagne on the terrace, while a string quartet played music I couldn't hear but could see in their elegant posture. It was everything Ashley had dreamed of. Elegant, exclusive, perfect in every detail. The kind of wedding that would be featured in society magazines and talked about for years in their social circle. The kind of wedding where a working-class father in a rented tuxedo would have stood out like a stain on white silk. I watched my son get married from a parking lot, uninvited to the most important celebration of his life, while strangers in expensive clothes took my place in his important moments. That night, I sat in my trailer with Linda's photo on the kitchen table, telling her picture about the day I'd missed. "I'm trying to keep my promise," I whispered to her smiling face, "but I don't know if I'm helping him or hurting him anymore." I decided to give him one more chance to remember who raised him, who loved him, who had always been there when he needed support. Christmas Eve should have been different, should have been a time for family, for traditions, for the kind of warmth that makes all the struggles worthwhile. I'd called ahead 3 separate times, asked if I could stop by with gifts for Emma, and maybe spend a few hours with my granddaughter. Ryan said yes each time, but each conversation was shorter, more strained, like he was checking items off a duty list rather than planning a family celebration. I arrived at 6 o'clock with wrapped presents for Emma. She was 8 months old then, my first grandchild, the light of my life, even though I'd only held her a handful of times. I also brought a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, something nice enough to show I'd made an effort, but not so expensive that it would make Ashley uncomfortable. The house looked like something from a holiday magazine feature about perfect Christmas celebrations. White lights draped every window with mathematical precision. Silver ornaments caught the interior lighting like captured moonbeams, and everything was coordinated with the kind of perfection that takes professional help and unlimited budget. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows that I'd paid to have cleaned monthly, I could see other guests already there, people I didn't recognize holding crystal glasses, and making the kind of animated conversation that comes with champagne and professionally catered food. The laughter sounded expensive. Ashley answered the door in a red cocktail dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Behind her, I could hear classical music, the gentle clink of expensive dishes, and conversations about stock portfolios and European vacation plans. "Jim," she said, not moving from the doorway, not inviting me inside my own house. "This is unexpected." "Ryan said I could come by," I said, holding up the gifts, and feeling suddenly awkward. I brought presents for Emma, Christmas gifts from her grandfather. Ashley's eyes flicked over my shoulder, checking to see if any neighbors were watching this interaction, calculating the social cost of my presence. "We have important guests tonight, people from Ryan's firm, some major clients from the investment bank. It's all very business-oriented, very formal." Standing on my own property, being told I wasn't welcome by people who didn't even know they were living in my house. That's when Ryan appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable in his pressed shirt and silk tie. That probably cost what I earned in a day. "Dad, hey," he said, stepping outside and closing the door behind him like he was containing something embarrassing. "Listen, tonight's kind of turned into a work thing. Ashley's parents flew in from Charleston. We have some major clients here, people from the bank's board of directors. It's pretty high level networking stuff. The implication was clear as electric current. I didn't belong in their world of high level networking and board directors. My presence would somehow diminish their social standing, embarrass them in front of people whose opinions mattered for Ryan's career advancement. I just wanted to see Emma, I said. Give her these presents. Maybe hold my granddaughter on Christmas Eve. I know, and normally that would be great. But tonight's really important for our future. Ashley's been planning this for weeks. There's a lot riding on making the right impression. I stood there on my own front porch, the porch I'd paid to have repaired when winter storms damaged the railing, the porch where I'd installed motion sensor lighting for their security, being told that my presence would somehow damage their future prospects. Maybe tomorrow, Ryan suggested, but his voice lacked that conviction. After the holidays, when things settle down? I looked through the window one more time and saw Ashley's father holding Emma, bouncing her on his knee while the other guests cooed over her cute Christmas dress. My granddaughter was being celebrated by strangers while her actual grandfather stood outside in the cold. The country club incident happened 2 weeks later, and that was the breaking point I should have seen coming months earlier. I decided to surprise Ryan at lunch, maybe bridge the growing gap between us, with a father-son conversation over coffee and honest talk about what was happening to our relationship. What I walked into instead was a scene that crystallized everything wrong with the direction our family was heading. That's when I started making calls to my lawyer. Ryan was at his usual corner table at the Riverside Country Club dining room with 3 colleagues and Ashley, deep in animated discussion about some major acquisition deal. The restaurant was exactly what you'd expect from an exclusive country club. White tablecloths that had never seen a stain, silver service that reflected light like mirrors, and the kind of quiet elegance that comes with a 5-figure annual membership fee. I recognized the setting as pure business rather than pleasure, but Ryan was my son, and I missed him with an ache that felt physical. I missed the easy conversations we used to have, the way he used to value my opinion about life decisions, the simple pleasure of spending time together without social calculations. So I walked over to their table, hoping to steal a few minutes of his time, maybe arrange a proper visit where we could talk without the pressure of Ashley's expectations. "Hey, son," I said, approaching their table with what I hoped looked like a confident smile. "Thought I might buy you lunch if you have a few minutes." The conversation stopped like someone had thrown a switch. 4 sets of eyes looked up at me. Work boots still dusty from the morning's electrical job. Faded jeans that had seen honest work. Flannel shirt that had been washed so many times it was soft as cotton gauze. I was dressed for the kind of work that keeps the lights on and the power flowing, not for the Riverside Country Club dining room where deals worth millions were discussed over wine that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. Ashley's face cycled through white, red, and back to white again. "Oh, um," she looked around desperately, clearly calculating social damage, and trying to figure out how to minimize the embarrassment of having a working-class man approach their business table. "Everyone," she said finally, her voice bright with fake cheerfulness, "this is our handyman, Jim. He's been doing some electrical work on our house system." The word handyman hit me like a physical slap. Ryan sat frozen, saying nothing, not correcting her, not claiming me as his father, just sitting there in silence while his wife reduced me to hired help. I smiled and played their game, but I was done playing. "That's right," I said, playing along because I didn't want to embarrass him further in front of his business associates. "Just finished checking your wiring system, Mr. Sullivan. Everything's working perfectly. You've got excellent electrical infrastructure." The colleagues smiled politely and nodded, then went back to their important conversation about market positioning and quarterly projections. Ashley looked relieved that I was playing along with her fiction. Ryan looked guilty but grateful, which somehow hurt worse than if he'd been openly ashamed. Walking out of that country club, I realized my son was embarrassed of the man who'd given him everything he thought he'd earned on his own merit. That night, I called my lawyer and asked specific questions about that 30-day termination clause I'd buried in Section 12 of Ryan's lease agreement. When Emma was born 3 months later, I thought everything would change between us. A grandchild has a way of putting family relationships back into proper perspective, of reminding people what really matters beyond bank accounts and social status and career advancement. I was completely wrong. The hospital had strict visiting restrictions due to policy changes, but somehow Ashley's parents managed to be there within hours of Emma's delivery. Her mother immediately started posting pictures on social media with captions like, "Our beautiful granddaughter arrives," and "Three generations of Whitmore women." Her father brought expensive flowers and champagne to celebrate with the nursing staff, making sure everyone knew this was an important family event. The local newspaper's society page ran a photo of 3 generations of Whitmores welcoming the newest addition to their distinguished family line. Ashley's mother was quoted talking about their plans for Emma's education at the finest private schools, her future debutante ball, the trust fund they were establishing for her Ivy League education. I learned about Emma's birth from a Facebook post that showed up in my newsfeed 12 hours after she was born. When I called the hospital to congratulate Ryan and ask about visiting hours, his voice was apologetic but firm in a way that told me Ashley was probably listening to every word. They were stealing my family from me piece by piece. "Dad, we're limiting visitors right now," Ryan said, his voice carefully controlled. "The doctors said too many people can be overwhelming for new mothers in the first few days. Ashley needs rest to recover properly." "I just want to meet my granddaughter," I said. "Hold her for a few minutes. Tell her about her grandmother Linda." I know. Maybe in a few days, when things settle down and Ashley feels stronger." I drove to the hospital anyway because some things are more important than social protocols and visiting restrictions. Through the maternity ward window, I watched Ashley's mother hold my granddaughter while Ashley's father took pictures with professional grade camera equipment. Ryan stood behind them, beaming with pride, surrounded by his wife's family, like they were the only grandparents who mattered in this child's life. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and whispered, "Hi, Emma. I'm your Grandpa Jim. I love you already." A nurse noticed me standing there and approached with professional concern. "Sir, are you looking for someone? Can I help you find a patient room?" "I'm looking for my son," I said, pointing through the glass. "That's my granddaughter being born today." She looked confused, then sympathetic when she realized I was on the outside looking in. "I'm sorry, sir. Only immediate family is allowed in the maternity ward during restricted hours." Immediate family. That phrase was becoming the soundtrack of my exclusion from Ryan's life. 2 weeks later, I showed up at the house with gifts I'd spent weeks preparing. A hand-carved wooden rocking horse I'd made in my workshop during long evenings, organic baby clothes I'd researched carefully, and a college fund savings account I'd opened with an initial deposit of the $10,000. Ashley answered the door but didn't invite me inside my own house. "Ryan's sleeping," she said through the barely opened door. "The baby's been fussy all night. He needs rest before going back to work." I could hear Emma crying inside my own house while I stood on my own doorstep, holding gifts for a granddaughter I wasn't being allowed to know. 3 months after Emma's birth, I made one final attempt to bridge the growing canyon between us. I called Ryan directly and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, father and son. No Ashley, no colleagues, no social pressure to perform for anyone else's expectations. "Just us," I said, "like we used to when you were younger and had problems you wanted to talk through." We met at Murphy's Diner downtown, the kind of place where electricians and investment bankers could sit at the same counter without anyone caring about dress codes or social hierarchies. Ryan looked exhausted, carrying the bone-deep tiredness that comes with new parenthood, demanding careers, and trying to maintain perfect appearances at all times. But he also looked uncomfortable, like he was worried someone from his social circle might see us together and draw conclusions about his background that would damage his carefully constructed image. "Dad," he said after we'd ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence for longer than felt natural, "I know things have been distant between us lately." "That's one word for it," I said, studying his face. He'd lost weight since Emma's birth, aged in ways that had nothing to do with sleepless nights, and everything to do with the stress of trying to be someone he wasn't. He shifted in his vinyl booth seat, avoiding direct eye contact, like a teenager who'd been caught in a lie. Ashley thinks we should establish some boundaries about family time, about expectations, about, about maintaining our independence as a nuclear family unit. What kind of boundaries are we talking about? Well, like giving us space to build our own life together, not depending on family for everything, not having people think we can't handle our own affairs or make our own decisions. I almost laughed at the irony, but it would have sounded bitter and angry. Depending on family for everything? You know what I mean, Dad. We're doing really well financially. We don't need help anymore. We're completely self-sufficient now. That's when I decided to test whether my son had any clue how much help he was actually receiving every single day. Self-made, in my house, with my money. Ryan, I said carefully, like I was handling live electrical wire, do you know who Meridian Property Group is? He looked puzzled, like I'd asked him to explain advanced calculus. The company that holds our mortgage? Yeah, of course. Why would you ask that? Do you know anything specific about them? Who owns them? How they operate? What their business model is? Not really, he shrugged, clearly wondering why his father was asking about mortgage companies during what was supposed to be a personal conversation. They gave us a really competitive rate, handle all the property management stuff efficiently, respond quickly to maintenance issues. They're great to work with. Why are you asking about them? I looked at my son, successful, confident, completely oblivious to the reality of his own living situation, and made a decision right there in that diner booth that would change both our lives forever. December 30th started like any other day. I was in my workshop, carefully rewiring an old lamp for Mrs. Henderson next door, when my phone rang. I expected a service call, maybe someone with holiday electrical emergencies that couldn't wait until after New Year's. Instead, it was Ryan, and his voice carried that familiar emotional distance that had become our new normal. Hey, Dad, quick question about tomorrow night. Tomorrow's New Year's Eve, I said, setting down my soldering iron and giving him my full attention. I figured I'd come by around 8, help you set up decorations if you need anything. Maybe hold Emma while you and Ashley get ready for your guests. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Way too long. Long enough for me to know that something was wrong before he said a single word. Actually, Dad, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped electrical tape around my ribs. Then my phone buzzed, with the text that changed everything. Ashley's family is flying in for the party, Ryan continued, his voice sounding rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation. Her parents, her brother and his wife, some of their close friends from the yacht club. It's going to be pretty upscale, you know, formal dress, business networking, that kind of high-level social event. I set down my tools completely, giving this conversation the serious attention it clearly required. And, well, we thought, maybe this year you could sit this one out? Let us handle the hosting ourselves. It's kind of an important night for Ashley's family to see how we've established ourselves in the community. The words hit me like touching a live wire without proper protection. Sit this one out. Like I was some burden they needed to manage around. Some embarrassment they needed to hide from their important friends and business associates. Ryan, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest like electrical current looking for ground. Are you uninviting me from your New Year's Eve party? It's not like that, Dad. It's just, you know how Ashley is about these social things. Image matters in our business circle. First impressions, networking opportunities, career advancement, all that stuff that affects our future. Then my phone buzzed with a text message that I read once, twice, 3 times, before the words fully penetrated my consciousness. You're not welcome at our New Year's party, Dad. Ashley's family will be there, and we need to maintain a certain image. Hope you understand. Maintain a certain image. Hope you understand. 35 years of sacrifice, late-night emergency calls to pay for his education, missing my own social opportunities to make sure he had everything he needed, reduced to an image problem that needed to be managed. At 8 o'clock that night, I found myself sitting in my pickup truck outside Ryan's house. My house, though he didn't know that yet. Watching my son's New Year's Eve party through windows I'd paid to have cleaned and maintained for 4 years. I was watching my son celebrate in my house while I sat in the cold like some kind of unwanted stranger. Cars lined the street like an expensive auto show. Mercedes with custom plates, BMWs that looked like they'd never seen a parking lot, a Bentley with plates reading Yacht 1 that I recognized as belonging to Ashley's father. Every vehicle represented more money than most families saw in years. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows that I'd had professionally cleaned just last week through Meridian Property Group's maintenance contract, I could see people in cocktail dresses and tailored suits that fit like they'd been measured by personal tailors. They held champagne glasses that caught the interior lighting like liquid crystal, laughed at conversations I'd never be invited to join, moved through my living room like they owned every square foot. Professional caterers moved through the kitchen I'd paid to renovate, setting up elaborate food displays on counters I'd chosen and paid for. A bartender in a bow tie mixed drinks behind a temporary bar set up in the corner of the living room where Linda's favorite chair used to sit. My house had never looked more beautiful or felt more distant. Ashley had decorated it with white lights and silver streamers, transforming my modest investment property into something that belonged in the society pages of magazines I'd never read. It looked like the perfect backdrop for the perfect life they believed they'd built through their own merit and hard work. And I was sitting in my pickup truck in the freezing December cold, watching through glass like some kind of pathetic stalker who didn't understand social boundaries. The cruelest part wasn't just the exclusion itself. It was watching them give guided tours to Ashley's family, pointing out architectural features of the house like they'd personally selected every detail. Ashley gestured toward the kitchen renovation I'd paid for, the hardwood floors I'd maintained, the crown molding I'd had installed to increase the property value. Her mother nodded approvingly at their excellent taste and smart financial planning. They were giving tours of my house to people who thought I wasn't good enough to enter my own property. At 10:30, Ashley's father, Harrison Whitmore III, according to the country club directory I'd looked up online, raised his champagne glass for what appeared to be an important toast. Self-sufficient. The words hit like a sledgehammer to my pride. I could hear Harrison's commanding voice clearly through the slightly open window. The winter air carried his words like he was speaking directly into my ear. To Ryan and Ashley, he announced in the kind of voice that comes from generations of giving orders and having them obeyed without question, for building something truly magnificent together. It takes real character to achieve this level of success so young, especially without relying on family wealth or connections. You've earned everything you have through pure merit and determination. The assembled guests murmured agreement and raised their crystal glasses in a symphony of expensive chimes. Ryan beamed with pride, like he was receiving a Nobel Prize, accepting congratulations for his self-made success story from people who mattered in his social and professional world. Ashley squeezed his hand, practically glowing with satisfaction at this public recognition of their independence and achievement, without relying on family wealth, earned through pure merit and determination. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white and my fingers ached from the pressure. They were toasting my son's complete independence while standing in my living room, drinking champagne I'd indirectly subsidized, celebrating achievements built on a foundation I'd secretly provided and maintained for 4 years. But the absolute worst was yet to come. "Harrison, you simply must tell us," called Ashley's mother from her position near the fireplace I'd had professionally cleaned last month. "How did these two remarkable young people manage to afford such a magnificent home in this exclusive neighborhood? The real estate market has been so incredibly challenging for young professionals." Ryan's answer cut through the night air like a blade through my heart. Hard work, smart investments, and absolutely no handouts from family. We believe completely in making our own way in the world. We've built this life without taking a single penny from anyone else. Ashley added with a laugh that carried perfectly through the cold December air. Some people never evolve beyond their circumstances, never rise above their limitations. We refuse to let family background hold us back from achieving our potential. The group laughed appreciatively. At my expense, at blue collar workers everywhere, at people like me who supposedly never evolved beyond working with our hands for honest wages. They were laughing at the man who owned the ground they stood on, who paid for the roof over their heads, who made their entire lifestyle possible. I started my truck and drove home in complete silence. In my trailer, I pulled out the lease agreement from my filing cabinet, the same document Ryan had signed 4 years ago without reading the fine print carefully enough to understand what he was actually agreeing to. Section 12 stared back at me like it had been waiting for this moment. 30-day termination clause for any reason, with proper written notice to the tenant. At 12:15 a.m. on New Year's Day, I called my lawyer Michael Richardson, who'd handled my real estate transactions for 20 years. Michael, it's Jim Sullivan. I need you to draw up a 30-day notice to quit for one of my properties. His voice was groggy, but immediately alert. He'd been in real estate law long enough to know that midnight calls on holidays usually meant serious business that couldn't wait for normal office hours. Which property are we talking about, Jim? Property number 7, the Colonial on Maple Street. I could hear papers shuffling on his end as he accessed my file from his home office computer. That's the lease-to-own arrangement, right? The one you set up through a Meridian Property Group? That's the one. Jim, there was a long pause. This is your son we're talking about. I'm fully aware of who the tenant is, Michael. Another pause, longer this time. Any particular legal reason for the termination that I should include in the documentation? I looked out my trailer window toward the distant neighborhood where Ryan's house still glowed with party lights, where people who thought I wasn't good enough for their social circle were celebrating in my property. The tenant has violated the terms of respectful occupancy. Michael had been practicing real estate law long enough to know that family business sometimes intersected with property law in ways that couldn't be explained in standard legal terminology. By morning, the paperwork would be filed with the county. Sometimes the best lesson is the hardest one to teach and the most expensive one to learn. January 2nd, 9:47 a.m. The process server found Ryan at his office at Blackstone Financial, surrounded by colleagues returning from holiday break, with coffee cups steaming and New Year's resolutions still fresh in their minds. Ryan Sullivan? Yes, that's me. You're being served with a 30-day notice to quit premises located at 1247 Maple Street. The envelope was thick, official, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Ryan's colleagues looked up from their morning emails and phone calls as he signed for the certified documents, with hands that had started to shake visibly. His assistant, Margaret, craned her neck curiously to see the legal letterhead. "What's Meridian Property Group?" she asked with the kind of innocent curiosity that makes private matters public. Ryan's face drained of color completely as he scanned the dense legal language that suddenly seemed written in a foreign dialect. Lease termination, 30 days to vacate. Failure to comply would result in formal eviction proceedings and potential legal action for unlawful detainer. At the bottom, a signature he didn't recognize and a phone number for legal inquiries. I don't understand, he said to the process server, who was already turning to leave with professional efficiency. There must be some mistake here. This is my house. I have a mortgage, not a lease. The process server handed him a business card without much interest in Ryan's confusion. All inquiries should be directed to the property management company, sir. Have a good day. The office fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic. Ryan's colleagues exchanged meaningful glances, the kind of looks that said someone's personal business had just become very public in the worst possible way. Ryan's perfect world started cracking like faulty electrical insulation. For the first time in 4 years, Ryan Sullivan was about to discover the difference between what he owned and what he thought he owned. He called in sick and drove home with documents clutched in his shaking hands, his mind racing through possibilities that all led to the same terrifying conclusion. Everything he believed about his life was wrong. What do you mean, notice to quit? Ashley demanded, reading over Ryan's shoulder as he spread the legal documents across the kitchen table. My kitchen table, in my house, though they still didn't fully grasp that reality. Ryan's hands trembled like he had a medical condition as he tried to make sense of legal language he'd signed, but never bothered to understand. The words seemed to swim on the page: tenant, landlord, lease agreement, termination clause, eviction proceedings. Look at this letterhead, he said, pointing to the company name with a finger that shook uncontrollably. Meridian Property Group, LLC. They're claiming we're tenants, not homeowners. Ashley's face cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and mounting fury. That's completely impossible. We own this house. We've been paying a mortgage for 4 years. We pay $4,200 a month to... She stopped mid-sentence as a terrible realization began to dawn on her. To who exactly, Ashley? Who do we send those monthly checks to? To the mortgage company. To... She grabbed their checkbook from the kitchen drawer, flipping frantically through old payment stubs. To Meridian Property Group. Ryan stared at the evidence spread before him like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture he absolutely did not want to see. 4 years of payments. 4 years of believing they were building equity, paying down principal, investing in their future security. The paperwork told a completely different story. Jesus Christ, Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible above Emma's crying from her high chair. We've been renting this entire time. Ashley snatched the lease agreement from his hands, scanning the terms they'd both signed without truly reading or understanding. This cannot be legal. Nobody signs a lease thinking it's a mortgage. This has to be some kind of fraud. But there it was, in black and white legal language that left no room for misinterpretation. Sullivan Holdings. That couldn't possibly be a coincidence. Ryan grabbed his phone with fingers that felt completely numb and dialed the number printed on the letterhead. When the receptionist answered, her voice was professional, but somehow familiar in a way that made his stomach clench. Meridian Property Group, this is Sullivan Holdings. How can I help you today? Sullivan Holdings. The name hit him like a physical assault to his chest. I need to speak to someone immediately about 1247 Maple Street, he managed to say. One moment, please. I'll transfer you to the principal owner. The hold music seemed to last forever while his entire world shifted on its axis. Ashley paced the kitchen frantically, Emma crying in her arms, both of them staring at Ryan like he possessed answers to questions he didn't even understand yet. Then a voice came on the line that made his world collapse completely. This is Jim Sullivan, principal owner. How can I help you? The phone nearly slipped from Ryan's grasp. Jim Sullivan. His father's name, his father's voice. Calm, professional. Completely in control of a situation that was destroying Ryan's understanding of his own life. Dad? The word came out like a question, though he knew the answer. Silence on the other end that stretched like an eternity of judgment. Then calm as death itself. Hello, Ryan. Dad, what the hell is going on? Why is your name on these legal papers? Why are you doing this to us? Because I own the house you've been living in for the past 4 years. The words hit like a sledgehammer to everything Ryan believed about himself. Ashley grabbed the phone from his hands with desperate fury. Mr. Sullivan, this is Ashley. There's been some terrible mistake. We own this house. We have a mortgage. We've been making payments religiously for years. You've been making rent payments to my company, I said, my voice carrying the patience of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a confused child. Check your paperwork carefully. It's a lease-to-own agreement, not a mortgage. It always has been. Ryan took the phone back, his voice breaking like an adolescent's. Dad, I don't understand. Why would you do this to me? Why would you lie to us? 35 years of chances. You had them all. I did it to help you, son, I said, my voice carrying 4 years of unacknowledged sacrifice. 4 years ago, you needed a house to match your new position and didn't have the credit history or down payment capital. I provided both through my company, kept you safe while letting you feel independent. But why are you kicking us out now? The question hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. Because respect can't be rented, Ryan, and you've been in arrears on that account for a very long time. Ryan's voice cracked completely. Dad, please. We can work this out somehow. I'm sorry about the party. I'm sorry about everything that's happened. About which specific incident, Ryan? The wedding I wasn't invited to because I wasn't considered immediate family? The Christmas Eve you asked me to leave because I might embarrass your business associates? The hospital where I couldn't hold my granddaughter because I wasn't on the approved visitor list? Or maybe the country club where your wife introduced me as the handyman to your colleagues? Each word was a nail in the coffin of the relationship we used to have. Ashley grabbed the phone again, her voice shrill with the kind of panic that comes when your entire world is revealed to be built on lies. Mr. Sullivan, you cannot just throw us out like common renters. We have a baby, we have careers, we have standing in this community. You have 30 days, I said, cutting through her protestations with the finality of a legal document. That's what the law requires, and it's more consideration than you've shown me for the past 2 years. This is absolutely insane, Ashley screamed into the phone. We won't be humiliated by some bitter old man who can't accept that his son has moved up in the world. Moved up? The irony in my voice was unmistakable. You're living in my house, Ashley. You've been living in my house for 4 years. I own the ground you're standing on, the roof over your head, and every square foot of equity you thought you were building. Ryan was crying now, actually crying like a child who'd been caught in an unforgivable lie. Some choices can't be undone, and some lessons come too late to matter. Ashley's immediate solution was to fight back with every legal resource they could afford. She spent the next 3 days on the phone with every attorney in the city who would take her call, desperately seeking someone who would tell her what she needed to hear. That this was illegal, unconscionable, something they could successfully contest in court. The legal reality was harsh and completely unforgiving. Ma'am, the third lawyer explained with professional patience, your husband signed a valid lease agreement with clear terms. The property owner has followed all legal procedures for termination. The 30-day notice was properly served according to state law. Unless you can prove fraud, deliberate misrepresentation, or coercion in the original signing, you don't have legal grounds to contest this eviction. But we thought it was a mortgage, Ashley protested desperately. What you thought and what you legally agreed to are two completely different matters. The document is unambiguous. This is a residential lease with a purchase option that was never formally exercised. Ashley threw the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall, like her dreams of fighting this through the legal system. This is all your fault, Ryan, she screamed, her voice echoing through my house. You should have read the paperwork more carefully. You should have known what you were signing. How could you be so completely stupid? But Ryan wasn't listening to his wife's recriminations anymore. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, doing terrible mathematics in his head that led to devastating conclusions. 4 years of rental payments, $4,200 multiplied by 48 months. Over $200,000 in money they'd believed was building equity and securing their future. Money that had actually been flowing directly into my bank account while I covered all the real expenses of property ownership. We never owned any of it, he whispered to himself like he was practicing saying the words. Not 1 square foot, not one shingle on the roof, not one doorknob or light switch. Ashley's parents refused to help when she called them in complete desperation. We cannot be associated with this kind of situation, her mother said with ice-cold finality. It reflects very poorly on our family reputation. The moving trucks were scheduled for Monday morning. Moving day arrived with the kind of professional efficiency that comes with expensive moving companies and careful legal planning. I'd hired Prestige Moving Services, the most reputable company in the city with excellent reviews and full insurance coverage, not out of cruelty toward my son, but because I wanted everything done correctly, legally, without giving Ryan any grounds to claim harassment, illegal eviction, or improper handling of his belongings. The trucks arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, like a perfectly choreographed military operation. By 8:15, half the neighborhood was gathered on sidewalks and positioned behind curtains, watching with fascination as boxes and furniture emerged from 1247 Maple Street, like the house was being systematically emptied of 4 years of accumulated dreams. Ashley cried openly as her belongings were loaded onto trucks with mechanical precision, by men who treated her most precious possessions like cargo to be transported. The expensive furniture that had looked so perfect in my spacious rooms, the wedding gifts that represented their social connections and family approval, Emma's elaborate nursery set that had cost more than most people's annual car payments. Everything that had made up their picture-perfect life was being reduced to cardboard boxes with inventory numbers written in black marker. Ryan stood on the front lawn in yesterday's wrinkled clothes, unshaven and hollow-eyed, watching his entire life get packed away by strangers who treated his personal belongings like items on a moving manifest. Neighbors whispered behind their hands and peered through windows, and I could see the exact moment when the family's reputation in this exclusive neighborhood shifted from admiration and envy to pity and social embarrassment. "Daddy," Emma reached for Ryan from Ashley's arms with the innocent confusion of an 18-month-old who couldn't understand why her familiar world was disappearing into the backs of large trucks, why her parents were crying, why strangers were carrying away her toys and furniture. At 2 p.m. exactly, the trucks pulled away from my house, leaving behind empty rooms and a family with nowhere to go, but down from the heights they'd thought they'd earned through their own merit. Pride comes before the fall, and the fall had finally arrived with professional moving services and legal documentation. Ryan had chosen pride over family, image over integrity, social status over the man who'd secretly provided everything he thought he'd achieved on his own. The professional fallout was swift, merciless, and completely predictable. Investment banking is a much smaller world than most people realize, and news travels at the speed of gossip when a senior vice president gets evicted from his own home by his own father. By Thursday morning, Ryan's colleagues were whispering in the break room with the kind of excited curiosity that feeds on other people's misfortune. By Friday afternoon, it was the primary subject of bathroom conversations and coffee break speculation. By the following Monday, clients were asking pointed questions about Ryan's judgment and financial stability. "Did you hear about Sullivan? Got kicked out of his house by his own father. And I thought he owned that place outright. Didn't he always brag about his real estate investments and property appreciation? Apparently not even close. Word is he's been living in his father's rental property for years without knowing it. The old man pulled the rug out from under him completely." The story spread through Blackstone Financial like wildfire, each retelling adding new details and fresh humiliation. How can you manage multi-million-dollar investment portfolios for sophisticated clients when you can't manage your own basic housing situation? How can you advise wealthy families on real estate investments when you don't even understand your own lease agreement? How can anyone trust your professional financial judgment when your personal finances are a complete disaster? Ryan's boss, Margaret Chen, called him into her corner office on Friday afternoon. Her expression was the kind of carefully controlled, professional concern that meant someone's career trajectory was about to be discussed in very serious terms. "Ryan, I need to ask you directly. Are you experiencing significant financial difficulties that might affect your work performance or judgment with client accounts?" "No, ma'am. This was purely a family situation. Personal issues that won't interfere with my professional responsibilities." "A family situation that resulted in eviction proceedings and public legal action?" Ryan's face burned with shame that felt like actual physical heat radiating from his skin. "It's complicated, but it won't affect my work." "I'm sure it's complicated, but our clients trust us with their most important financial decisions and their family wealth. If you can't handle your own family's finances and housing arrangements, how can they be confident you can handle theirs?" Their perfect life was built on lies, and now everyone could see the foundation cracking. Ashley filed for separation on a Thursday morning in February, exactly 6 weeks after moving day. The papers were served while Ryan was eating instant oatmeal in their cramped studio apartment, trying to explain to 18-month-old Emma why they couldn't go to the big house anymore, why Grandpa Jim never visited, why Mommy cried so much during phone calls with her parents. "I cannot continue living like this," Ashley announced, her designer suitcases already packed and positioned by the door like an evacuation plan. The humiliation, the constant whispers, the endless questions from my family and friends. My parents have a social reputation to maintain, Ryan. This entire situation doesn't meet our family's standards. So you're taking Emma away from me? I'm taking our daughter to live somewhere she won't be embarrassed by her father's poor judgment and questionable decision-making abilities. The irony was perfect and terrible in ways that cut deeper than any knife. Ashley, who'd spent 2 years systematically excluding me from Emma's life, was now using my granddaughter as a weapon against my son. The pattern was repeating itself exactly. One generation removed, like a genetic disorder of the heart that passed from parent to child. Ryan signed the temporary custody papers with hands that shook like he had a progressive medical condition. The terms were financially and emotionally devastating. Emma would live with Ashley's parents during weekdays, visit Ryan on alternating weekends only. Child support? $1,800 per month from his already stretched and damaged salary. After Ashley left, taking Emma and most of the remaining furniture that fit their reduced circumstances, Ryan sat alone in his studio apartment, surrounded by furniture that looked completely ridiculous in the cramped space. The leather sofa that had commanded attention and respect in my spacious living room now dominated the entire apartment like a monument to his former success. The dining room set that had hosted elegant dinner parties and important business meetings was crammed into a kitchenette barely big enough for two people to stand in simultaneously. Everything that had made him feel successful, accomplished, worthy of respect was gone. The house, the wife, the perfect family image that had opened doors and impressed clients, and made Ashley's parents approve of their daughter's choice in husband. At night, Ryan would video call Emma, watching her babble and reach for the phone screen, while Ashley's mother held her in rooms he'd never be invited to enter. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in July when the summer heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, Ryan showed up at my trailer completely unannounced. I was working on my truck in the driveway, replacing worn brake pads and enjoying the quiet satisfaction of honest mechanical work when I heard footsteps crunching across the gravel. I looked up from under the hood to see my son standing there, thinner than I remembered him ever being, wearing faded jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of the expensive suits that used to be his daily uniform. His face carried the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from learning hard lessons about life the most painful way possible. "Hi, Dad." I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on an old rag that had seen better decades, taking my time to really look at him. "Ryan, can we talk? I mean, really talk this time?" I nodded toward two folding chairs I kept by the trailer's front steps, the same chairs where Linda and I used to sit in the evenings after dinner, planning our future and watching the sun set over the small world we'd built together. We sat down like strangers meeting for the first time, the morning sun warming our faces, while the emotional distance between us remained measured in much more than just physical feet. "I lost everything," he said finally, his voice carrying the flat honesty of someone who'd completely run out of pretenses and social masks. "The house, Ashley. Half my time with Emma. My reputation at work is completely destroyed. The friends I thought I had from the country club don't return my phone calls anymore. Everything I thought made me successful, everything I was proud of and bragged about, it's all gone." I waited patiently. This was his conversation to lead, his apology to make or not make, his bridge to build if he wanted one to exist between us again. "But the absolute worst part isn't losing all the material stuff, Dad. The worst part is losing you. Losing the relationship with the man who actually built everything I was bragging about, who made my whole life possible while I was busy being ashamed of him in front of people who didn't matter." His voice cracked on those last words like he was 16 years old again, asking for forgiveness after staying out past curfew. I spent 2 years being embarrassed by the person who loved me enough to sacrifice his own recognition so I could feel successful and independent. I chose people who didn't even like the real me over the man who'd been protecting me and supporting me my entire life, Ryan continued, tears starting to flow without any attempt to hide them. I let Ashley convince me that you were somehow holding me back, when the truth was you were the only thing keeping me from falling. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and showed me a recent picture of Emma. She was walking confidently now, her chubby legs carrying her across what looked like Ashley's parents' marble foyer. She had Linda's smile and Ryan's stubborn chin, and she was beautiful in the way that only toddlers can be when they're discovering the world. She's walking everywhere now, taking real steps, climbing on everything, getting into trouble. He managed a weak smile. She's got your determination and Mom's curiosity. I thought you should know how she's growing. I studied the photo carefully, my granddaughter's face bright with the pure joy that only 18-month-olds can manage when everything is still new and exciting. She's beautiful, Ryan. She looks like she's got your mother's spirit. I want her to know her grandfather, he said, his voice gaining strength like he'd been practicing this conversation. The real one, not the embarrassment Ashley convinced me you were, but the man who built a business empire while wearing work boots. The man who owned more property than most real estate companies while living in a modest trailer because he was more concerned with substance than appearance. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, no longer caring about maintaining any kind of image or composure. I want Emma to know about the man who loved his family enough to sacrifice everything for their success, even his own credit and recognition. I want her to understand what real strength looks like, what real love does when nobody's watching. I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too long was finally getting some slack. Respect can't be bought or inherited, son, I said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep in my chest where I'd been carrying this pain. It has to be earned every single day, one choice at a time. Ryan nodded, tears streaming down his face without shame or embarrassment. I know, Dad. I understand that now, and earning it back is going to be harder than earning it the first time. I looked at my son sitting there in my folding chair, humbled, broken, finally understanding what he'd thrown away and what it might cost to recover even a small piece of it. For the first time in 2 years, I could see past the expensive clothes and social pretensions to the boy I'd raised. The man Linda had hoped he'd become before cancer took her away from us. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately, Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper, about what she'd think of the man I became, the choices I made, the way I treated you. Your mother loved you more than her own life, I said, but she also raised you to be better than what you became these past 2 years. I know. I failed her. I failed you. I failed that Emma. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that used to help me sort screws and hold flashlights when he was small. But I want to try to make it right, if you'll let me. I was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood waking up around us. Somewhere a lawnmower started up. A dog barked. Life continuing its normal rhythm while we sat there trying to figure out if we could rebuild something that had been broken so thoroughly. It won't be easy, I said finally. Trust is like electrical work. Once you've damaged the wiring, you have to rebuild the whole system from scratch. You can't just patch over the burned parts and hope for the best. I understand that. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Are you willing to do it without Ashley? Because she's never going to accept me as family. I'm always going to be the blue-collar embarrassment who doesn't fit her image of success. Ryan was quiet for a long time, considering the full weight of what I was asking him to choose. Ashley made her choice when she filed for separation, he said finally. She chose her parents' approval over our family. I'm done making that same mistake. I nodded slowly. Then let's start earning it back, son. One day at a time, one honest conversation at a time. The sun was getting higher now, promising another hot day, but sitting there with my son, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope that we might actually find our way back to being a family again.